Contrary to what the mainstream media suggests, the election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is still extremely close. And Trump is still leading in this election, even though the media is starting to say, Harris will win this election. And even some Trump supporters in my comments are saying, well, I think Harris is going to win. This prediction is off. Well, I'm going to say right here, Donald Trump is favored to win this election. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that's just the fact of the matter. He is currently favored. And it's not just me or the polls that are saying this. It's also the people that are actually putting their money in the betting markets. People are saying Donald Trump has a 60% chance of actually winning this election. And even the markets that give Trump a relatively low chance of winning, such as predicted, have Trump at still a 53% chance at winning this election. And that makes him the favorite currently to win this election. So, if you hear that Kamala Harris is likely to win this election, just remember that is not necessarily true at this current moment. Kamala Harris has been gaining in the polls, but not to an extent where she actually surpasses Trump. Because as you can see, actually, Kamala Harris is gaining in the polls, but also Donald Trump is gaining in the polls too. So basically what's happening is people are shifting from third-party candidates to either Trump or Harris. And therefore both Trump and Harris are gaining steam. And Harris obviously is doing better than Biden was, and that's pretty clear. Honestly, that's because of Biden's poor debate performance. It tanked his polls. And obviously, as a result, Harris is doing better because she's younger, more coherent, etc. than Biden is. And before we go on, this is practically the 1-week anniversary of when I was arbitrarily demonetized and then remonetized again due to YouTube, whatever they were doing to me. I don't know what they were doing. But anyways, this is the 1-week anniversary of it, pretty much. And if you want to support the channel, make sure to subscribe today to join the 2%. And thank you, and back to the video. Anyway, since before I talk about subscribing to the channel, we're talking about Biden not necessarily being mentally there. And I found something kind of interesting that substantiates this claim even further. So when Biden was talking about his Supreme Court overhaul, which is like the biggest news of the past few days, Speaker Mike Johnson said Biden's proposal was, quote, dead on arrival. And when Biden was asked about it, he said, quote, that's what he is, referring to Johnson. And then he added, he is dead on arrival. So I don't know why Biden is saying this, especially after his infamous bullseye tweet. This is just very bad optics for him. Obviously, I know he doesn't mean any harm towards Speaker Johnson, but this is just, it's clear he's not mentally there if he's saying stuff like this. And it's just not a good thing to say, especially after an assassination attempt on Donald Trump not that long ago. He should not be saying stuff like this, even though I know for a fact he did not mean what's being insinuated here. He did not mean that, but it's just so bad that he is just saying stuff like this, because I know his younger self wouldn't be this careless. And that's just a little thing I found that kind of exemplifies how he's not really there, so to speak, currently. And it's just a shame what's happened, where he's just lost a lot of his mental faculties. We saw it on the debate, we see it here. But obviously, he's not running in this election, so he's not that important anymore, besides, obviously, being the incumbent president, which is a pretty important person, I do say. But in the election itself, he's not the most important, other than people tying Harris to him. But what's more important is what he's currently doing in his last few months of office. So he's essentially a lame duck. So everyone knows he's not going to get another term, but he's trying to do a little more before he leaves. And one of these things is overhauling the Supreme Court. However, there's one problem with that. A lot of things, and in particular the Supreme Court, are heavily outlined by the Constitution. And the Constitution is the United States' practically sacred document. And unless there's amendments, you can't really change anything about it. So the problem with Biden's proposal is that the Constitution explicitly gives federal judges lifetime tenure unless they resign, retire, or are removed. And you can't really go around that. So there are a few ways that a law professor says, but when a guy who studied constitutional law for all his life, Mike Johnson, is the Speaker of the House, I am sure this will not get passed in the House. Right, so Biden is basically going to get shut down on this, and he's probably going to end his presidency with another loss in terms of negotiations with Congress. But regardless, I'm including this just to talk about perhaps what Harris may actually focus on if she wins a full term. And lastly, the Veepstakes for the Democrats are essentially going in shambles. The governor of Kentucky, who was doing really well in the Veepstakes at a certain point, is now not doing so well. And like I said in my last video, similar to what's happening with Vance, a lot of research is being done on the people in the Democrat Veepstakes, and that's going to be released, and people are going to have more negative views on essentially these people than they did prior. That's just always what happens when someone goes from maybe a state to a national spotlight. And that seems to be happening with the governor of Kentucky, where he's criticized for his abortion record. And it's mostly because he's the governor of Kentucky. He can't really be the most pro-choice governor there is and get reelected in Kentucky, right? So a lot of people are saying we don't want him as our vice president. A lot of Democrats are saying that, and that's partially why he is lowering in the odds in the Veepstakes. And someone else who has lowered in the odds is Governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, who actually withdrew from the vice presidential field. So this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but it is possible there has been also more research conducted on him, or he doesn't want something leaked. But anyways, to support my conspiracy theory, he actually was gonna be vetted, but declined to participate. So, I know it's just a conspiracy, but this is a little suspicious. Why would he decline to participate? Unless there was something to maybe be revealed. But in the hopes that I don't get sued by Roy Cooper or something, just remember that's a conspiracy that is not really based in any fact whatsoever. It's a little fun to think about, why did he drop out from the Veepstakes? Because it seems like there's something up with that. But then again, he says this wasn't the right time, so here he could be implying a 2028 run. So those are probably the two main explanations, very opposite sides of the spectrum. Either he's going to try to run for presidency, or there's something he's trying to hide. But either way, he's not going to be the VP. And it's basically going to be between Kelly, Shapiro, and Waltz, and we'll see probably in the coming weeks who it will be. But now we're going to start with this election prediction between Harris and Trump. So Harris, being a pretty mainstream Democrat at this point, now being the vice president and now being the nominee for the presidency, it seems like she's going to win most of the states that Biden pretty solidly won back in 2020 and that Obama won solidly, etc. I don't think that states like New Jersey will go to Trump, states like New York, etc., even though they might go a little more to Trump than they did in the past. But still, the safe states will remain safe states, and also Illinois goes to Harris, obviously. But still, these are the battleground states in this upcoming election. And I'll do something a little different this time. I'll go from West Coast to East Coast. So, in the two West Coast states of Nevada and Arizona, there's something a little interesting. In Nevada, there's a heavily contested Senate race between Jackie Rosen and Sam Brown. And in Arizona, there's a heavily contested Senate race between Ruben Gallego and most likely Kari Lake. Even though it does seem like Mark Lamb stands a little bit of a chance at this primary, actually. But Lake having the funding and being endorsed by Trump makes it seem like she will likely be the nominee. But both states have very close, very competitive Senate races. But the thing with both states is that the Senate races seem to be tilting towards the Democrats. Because remember, Jackie Rosen is a popular incumbent. Ruben Gallego is a congressman. He's pretty popular himself. So, we can see that in prediction websites, it's actually a 70% chance that the Democrats will win the Senate election in Arizona. Both states essentially have Democrat incumbents. Ruben Gallego is not the incumbent, but Kyrsten Sinema, who would have been the incumbent, threw her political career away by registering as an independent for practically no reason because she caucused with the Democrats anyways. But still, both states are likely going to Donald Trump, at around a 60% chance of going to Trump. And that's mostly because of the polls. While the polls are saying that Ruben Gallego will win in the Senate race in Arizona and that Jackie Rosen will win in Nevada, the polls in Arizona and Nevada for the national race have Trump up. As you can see, +3 and +2. So it seems like there's some cross-ticket voting where people are voting for Trump and then people are voting for either Gallego or Jackie Rosen. And that might just be because of essentially incumbency advantage, incumbency stuff, etc. But still, it's a little interesting to think about. Or maybe people just aren't inspired by Sam Brown or Kari Lake. But regardless, it seems like Trump is winning in both states in the West Coast. However, there are two West Coast states that he actually now loses in. Even though they were getting more and more competitive, Harris will defeat Donald Trump in both Colorado and New Mexico. I'm not really going to go too deep into these since prediction websites have both states pretty solidly going to Harris. But the state of Texas essentially cancels out Colorado and New Mexico and more, giving its whopping 40 electoral votes to Donald Trump. As we can see, it has a 91% chance of going to Trump, even though the Senate race in Texas is not a slam dunk for Ted Cruz, the incumbent senator who at one point actually ran for the presidency. And Ted Cruz, he does not actually have the endorsement of Donald Trump, which I find to be a little strange, but still, it seems like he's going to win this election. In the presidential election, it is a lot less close. As we can see, Donald Trump leads by as much as +9, and there aren't any polls between Harris and Trump, and that's because it's not close at all. Trump is going to win in Texas. But I can't say that it'll safely go to Donald Trump, especially considering it did not safely go to Trump even in 2016. It went to Trump by 9, but for me, safe states are 10 and higher. But now we get to the Midwest, starting with Minnesota. Minnesota is the state in the Midwest that is most likely going to Harris. As we can see, Minnesota has an 83% chance of going to Harris. That's similar to New Mexico and Colorado. And why is that? Well, it's because Minnesota has gone to Democrats in the most consecutive elections in a row out of any state in the entire union, not even Hawaii. Minnesota is the state. And history aside, Minnesota just votes for Democrats time and time again. It's getting a little closer, especially since it is in the Midwest, but it did go to Biden by 7 points, and its polling is going towards Harris. And it seems like Harris will win the state. On the other hand, Wisconsin is likely going to Donald Trump. Wisconsin used to be heavily favored to go to the Democrats at like 60% chance, etc., but now it seems like it has a 60% chance of going to the Republicans. And a lot of that is also due to polling. So remember, the election in 2020 in Wisconsin was less than a percentage point. And let me ask you a question. Are Democrats more popular now than they were then? And the answer to that is they were more popular in 2020. I'll ask you another question. Are Republicans more popular now than they were then? And the answer is yes, Republicans are more popular now than they were in 2020. And a lot of that is due to a combination of factors. And if you don't believe me, well, I'll just show you some approval ratings. Harris's disapproval, her net disapproval, is around 14%. And this is extremely high for a vice president. On the other hand, Donald Trump, who was a president, and at the end of his tenure as president, he was not doing well in favorability. He has had a large shift towards being more and more favorable, going from a net unfavorable of around 17 just less than a month ago to now it being cut in half to 9. And I think a lot of this is due to the assassination attempt and his response to it. And Trump is basically able to galvanize his base of supporters time and time again. When everyone thought he was never going to run again back in January of 2020, but Trump was able to pull back his base and make it stronger than ever. And with that being said, he is winning in some of these Midwest states that previously were polling towards Biden or Harris, with one being Wisconsin. And another could potentially be Michigan, which is essentially a coin flip at 51% chance of going to Harris, so I'll just decide using the polls. So the polls do indicate a Trump lead in Michigan, yet Trump did lose Michigan by almost 3 percentage points back in 2020. But still, I think there will be a 3-point shift towards Donald Trump in the state of Michigan, and he will slightly win in Michigan. The state of Ohio will solidly go to Donald Trump, especially considering he chose Vance and he has made strides in the Midwest, and he already was winning Ohio. He won by 8 in 2016, and he also won by 8 in 2020. So it can be said that Trump for certain will win the state of Ohio. And now we get to Florida. So Florida is Trump's home state, and it is a state where Trump has made great strides in. We saw it went to Trump by about 3 in 2020, and it'll likely go to Trump by around +5 to +7 in 2024. And the polls substantiate this, with Trump winning in this one poll +8, then this one +7, and you can't really see any below +4. And basically, Trump has pretty much locked up Florida, which has for decades been the most important state in every single election. Now it seems like it's pretty solidly going to Donald Trump. And so he locks up the 30 electoral votes in Florida. And now, he only needs to win a few swing states to actually win this election. As you can see, he's within striking distance of winning this election, with many, many states to go. But to make this suspenseful, I'm going to start with the Northeast, which is an area that Democrats win quite frequently. You see, the Northeast pretty much all votes for the same candidate in almost every election, until Trump flipped Pennsylvania in 2016. And it seems like he has potential to flip 2 more states in this election, being Maine and New Hampshire, where Republicans in the future, 2028 and beyond, may even be able to flip another state in the Northeast, being New Jersey. But in this election itself, it seems like Trump will not flip New Jersey, and he won't even flip New Hampshire or Maine. but he will win the consolation vote of Maine's 2nd district. The reason I say he won't win New Hampshire or Maine is due to polling. New Hampshire and Maine both released some polls that I've covered that have Harris up by a pretty large margin in both states. So, due to the fact that Hillary Clinton won both states back in 2016, Biden won them in 2020, and the polling is not in Trump's favor, I cannot give either state to Donald Trump, and it's pretty obvious that both states will likely go to Harris. Harris will also pick up Nebraska's 2nd district, which is the more urban part of Nebraska, a part of Nebraska that Polymarket says has a 65% chance of going to Harris. Now we'll get to Virginia. Even though Republicans have been doing well in Virginia in the governor race, and it seems a little promising for Republicans in the Senate race, even though it is pretty obvious Tim Kaine is almost certainly going to win, but the Republicans are putting up a pretty decent fight. But anyways, it seems like Virginia will still go to Harris and the Democrats. Polling has favored Donald Trump, but these polls might be an outlier, as most polls conducted in the past favor both Biden and Harris. And I'm not the only one saying this. The betting markets have Virginia at an 82% chance of going to Harris. So while Virginia will be a closer state than it was in the past, notably 2020 or 2016, it'll still go to Harris in this election. And now with our remaining 3 states, Harris needs to win all 3 to win this election, and Trump only needs to win 1. And we'll start with Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, probably out of the 3 remaining states, has the highest chance of going to Harris. Remember, it did go to Biden in 2020 by 1.2 points, and it only went to Trump in 2016 by 0.72, whereas North Carolina and Georgia both went to Trump by above 3 percentage points. Polymarket has Pennsylvania likely going to Harris, but in my opinion, the polls do indicate that Trump will likely win in Pennsylvania. The most recent poll has Harris up by 1, but most of the other major polls do have Trump leading in Pennsylvania, so I will give it to Donald Trump as a tilt state. And finally, we have our last 2 states of North Carolina and Georgia. So North Carolina did go to Donald Trump in 2020, even though it wasn't predicted that it would do that. But in 2024, it is predicted that Trump will win in the state of North Carolina. In fact, pretty much every poll does say that Trump will win in North Carolina, even though the Democrats will win the governor race. But North Carolina will likely go to Donald Trump, probably by a similar margin that it did back in 2016. And finally, we have Georgia. Polls do indicate that in the state of Georgia, Harris does lose to Donald Trump by as much as 5 percentage points, and likely around 3. And now to spice things up a bit, since this was pretty similar to my last one, especially with the final map, I will give Pennsylvania to Harris, because that is what the polls are currently indicating. But still, Trump does win 293 to 245. And if you want more, make sure to subscribe, and thank you